Before we embark on what may be the most disturbing and spiritually complex investigation I've ever undertaken into the hidden supernatural crimes of early 20th century New Orleans, I want to personally welcome each of you who has chosen to join me on this journey into one of America's most carefully concealed fraternal conspiracies. Whether you're watching this from the bustling energy of a modern city or the peaceful quiet of a rural community, whether it's your morning companion with coffee, or your late-night exploration of history's darkest mysteries, your presence here creates a bond that transcends time and geography. Please take a moment to share in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your world. It helps me understand the incredible global brotherhood we're building as we uncover these forgotten chapters of American occult history. What I'm about to reveal began with a discovery so shocking that it forced historians to reconsider everything they thought they knew about the intersection of fraternal organizations, supernatural practice, and systematic murder in progressive-era America. In January 2022, during the renovation of a historic building that had once housed the Odd Fellows Lodge on Magazine Street, workers discovered a hidden basement that had been sealed for over 115 years. Inside this underground chamber, they found what can only be described as a ritual slaughterhouse, complete with altars constructed from human bones, ceremonial implements designed for the systematic torture and execution of victims, and most horrifying of all, a detailed membership registry documenting a secret society that had operated within New Orleans' legitimate fraternal organizations while using their cover to commit what they called the sacred work of spiritual purification. The registry, bound in what forensic analysis would later confirm to be human skin and written in blood-based ink, covered a period from 1904 to 1910 and detailed the activities of a group that called itself the Ancient and Mystical Order of Hoodoo Brothers, a secret society within a secret society that had infiltrated multiple fraternal organizations throughout New Orleans while developing what they believed to be the ultimate fusion of African spiritual traditions, Masonic ritual, and systematic human sacrifice. The final entry, dated March 15, 1910, simply stated, "The great cleansing is complete, the city has been purified through sacred blood. We have achieved what our ancestors only dreamed of, the perfect balance between the world of the living and the realm of the spirits." It was signed with an elaborate seal bearing the names, Grand Master Etienne Thibodeau, Senior Warden Baptiste Boudreau, Junior Warden Armand Dufresne, and Secretary-Treasurer Claude Marigny. This discovery would prove to be the key to understanding a series of ritualistic murders, mysterious disappearances, and supernatural phenomena that had plagued New Orleans during the first decade of the 20th century but had been dismissed by authorities as unrelated crimes or the product of superstitious minds unable to cope with the rapid social changes of the progressive era. To understand the full scope and horror of what the Hoodoo Brothers accomplished during their years of operation, we must first immerse ourselves completely in the New Orleans of 1907, a city where the boundaries between legitimate fraternal organizations and occult societies, between social reform and spiritual terrorism, between brotherhood and blood sacrifice were more fluid than anywhere else in America. New Orleans in 1907 was a metropolis of approximately 340,000 residents, making it one of the largest cities in the South and a crucial center of American commerce and culture, but these numbers barely hint at the complex network of secret societies, fraternal organizations, and occult groups that made the city a perfect breeding ground for the kind of ritualistic criminality that the Hoodoo Brothers would perfect. The city sprawled along the Mississippi River's crescent bend like a vast lodge hall where countless secret ceremonies were conducted behind closed doors, its architecture creating perfect venues for the kind of ritualistic activities that required privacy, symbolism, and the kind of acoustic properties that would contain sounds that neighbors might find disturbing. The climate was subtropical and oppressive, with summers that regularly exceeded 100 degrees Fahrenheit and humidity levels that seemed to intensify the psychological pressure that drove men to seek meaning and power through membership in organizations that promised access to hidden knowledge and supernatural abilities. The fraternal landscape of 1907 New Orleans was extraordinarily complex, reflecting the city's unique position as a meeting point of different cultural, racial, and religious traditions that had each developed their own systems of male bonding, mutual aid, and secret knowledge. The city was home to dozens of Masonic lodges, Odd Fellows chapters, Knights of Pythias assemblies, and other mainstream fraternal organizations that provided social structure, business networking, and charitable support for their members while maintaining elaborate systems of ritual, symbolism, and graduated initiation that created powerful psychological bonds between participants. But beneath this visible fraternal culture lay darker currents that few historians have been willing to acknowledge. The connection between fraternal ritual and occult practice in New Orleans was profound and sometimes dangerous, with many organizations incorporating elements of voodoo, spiritualism, and other supernatural traditions into their ceremonies in ways that went far beyond the symbolic mysticism of mainstream Freemasonry. The city's unique racial dynamics had created opportunities for African American spiritual traditions to influence white fraternal organizations, resulting in hybrid forms of ritual practice that combined European ceremonial magic with African-derived techniques for communicating with spirits and manipulating supernatural forces. It was into this world of fraternal complexity and occult possibility that the four men who would become the leadership of the Hoodoo brothers had emerged in the early 1900s, each bringing extensive experience in legitimate fraternal organizations and an obsession with pushing the boundaries of what ritual practice could accomplish. Grand Master Etienne Thibodeau was perhaps the most publicly prominent of the four, serving as the worshipful master of St. John's Lodge No. 16, one of the most prestigious Masonic lodges in New Orleans, while secretly developing what he called the true ancient mysteries, that he believed had been diluted and corrupted by centuries of European influence. Contemporary descriptions of Grand Master Thibodeau, found in Masonic records, business correspondence, and society pages discovered in various New Orleans archives, paint him as a man of extraordinary charisma and undeniable leadership ability. He was described as tall and imposing, with the kind of commanding presence that made other men naturally defer to his authority, and an encyclopedic knowledge of fraternal history, ritual, and symbolism that had earned him recognition as one of the most learned Masons in the South. He spoke fluent French, English, Spanish, and what colleagues described as several African dialects, and was said to possess an almost supernatural ability to understand the psychological mechanisms that made fraternal ritual so powerful. Senior Warden Baptiste Boudreau, the second member of the leadership quartet, was a prominent businessman who owned several restaurants and entertainment venues throughout New Orleans while serving as an officer in multiple fraternal organizations including the Odd Fellows, Knights of Pythias, and Ancient Order of Hibernians. Born in New Orleans around 1870 to a wealthy Creole family, he had used his business success and fraternal connections to build a network of influence that extended throughout the city's commercial and political establishments. Junior Warden Armand Dufresne was the group's primary ritualist, a man who had spent years studying the ceremonial practices of fraternal organizations around the world and had developed what he claimed were more authentic versions of ancient initiation rites that had been practiced by secret societies for thousands of years. He served as the senior deacon of several Masonic lodges and was known throughout the fraternal community for his ability to conduct ceremonies that seemed to transport participants to altered states of consciousness that went far beyond the symbolic experiences offered by conventional ritual. Secretary-Treasurer Claude Marigny, the youngest of the four at approximately 35 years old in 1907, was perhaps the most intellectually sophisticated member of the group. He had been educated at Tulane University and had spent several years in Europe studying comparative religion, anthropology, and what he called the scientific principles underlying spiritual phenomena. He served as the librarian for several fraternal organizations and had assembled what was reportedly the most comprehensive collection of occult and fraternal literature in the South. The transformation of these four respected fraternal leaders into the Hoodoo brothers appears to have begun in 1904, when they started meeting privately to discuss what they saw as the spiritual inadequacy of conventional fraternal ritual and their belief that true brotherhood could only be achieved through practices that involved genuine supernatural power and real sacrifice rather than symbolic gestures. The registry found in the hidden basement reveals that they had become convinced that mainstream fraternal organizations had lost touch with their ancient origins and that only the most extreme measures could restore the authentic spiritual power that secret societies had once possessed. The first experiments in what they called authentic brotherhood ritual began in the winter of 1904, when the four men started conducting private ceremonies that incorporated elements of voodoo, African traditional religion, and what they claimed were the original practices of ancient mystery schools. The early procedures, as described in Grand Master Thibodeau's detailed notes, involved the sacrifice of animals and the use of their blood to consecrate ritual implements and create what they believed were genuine spiritual connections between participants. The breakthrough came in the spring of 1905, when the Hoodoo brothers successfully conducted what they believed to be the first authentic initiation ceremony that involved the sacrifice of a human being whose spiritual essence was used to create permanent bonds between the participants and the supernatural forces they sought to control. The ritual, which they called the True Raising, required a volunteer who was willing to die for the brotherhood, and the ceremony culminated in what the brothers described as the ultimate expression of fraternal devotion, the gift of one's life for the spiritual advancement of one's brothers. The success of this initial human sacrifice led the brothers to expand their operations, developing increasingly sophisticated techniques for what they called spiritual harvesting, while building a network of initiates who were willing to participate in ceremonies that went far beyond anything offered by conventional fraternal organizations. The hidden basement contained evidence of dozens of these true raising ceremonies, each one requiring a human sacrifice and resulting in what the brothers claimed were genuine supernatural abilities that could be used to influence events throughout New Orleans. The recruitment process reveals a systematic approach that prioritized men who possessed what the brothers called spiritual potential, a quality that seemed to correlate with dissatisfaction with conventional fraternal organizations, a desire for authentic spiritual experience, and the psychological capacity to participate in increasingly extreme rituals without losing their sanity or their commitment to the brotherhood. The primary targets were members of legitimate fraternal organizations who had expressed interest in more advanced or esoteric practices. The brothers had developed an elaborate system for identifying and recruiting potential initiates, using their positions in mainstream fraternal organizations to observe and evaluate candidates over extended periods before approaching them with invitations to participate in what were initially described as advanced study groups or research lodges that were exploring the historical origins of fraternal ritual. The recruitment process involved multiple stages of evaluation and gradually increasing levels of commitment that allowed the brothers to identify men who were willing to participate in their most extreme practices. The initiation process itself, as described in horrifying detail in the brothers' ritual manuals, involved keeping candidates in isolation while gradually introducing them to increasingly disturbing practices designed to break down their conventional moral constraints and rebuild their psychological framework around absolute loyalty to the brotherhood. The process culminated in participation in a human sacrifice ceremony where the candidate was required to personally kill the victim as proof of their commitment to the organization. The brothers had developed a sophisticated understanding of group psychology and ritual manipulation that allowed them to transform ordinary men into willing participants in systematic murder. The documentation reveals that they had identified specific psychological techniques for overcoming moral resistance, creating artificial family bonds between participants, and using ritual symbolism to reframe murder as a sacred act that was necessary for spiritual advancement. The most ambitious of these ceremonies was what the brothers called the Grand Sacrifice, a ritual that required 13 victims who were killed simultaneously while their spiritual essence was harvested to power what the brothers claimed was a permanent transformation of New Orleans' spiritual landscape. The performance of this ceremony, according to the documentation, took place on the winter solstice of 1908 and resulted in what the brothers believed was the establishment of a supernatural foundation that would give them permanent control over the city's spiritual and political affairs. The applications for these spiritual harvesting techniques extended far beyond simple fraternal bonding to include what the brothers called civic purification, the systematic elimination of individuals who were deemed to be spiritually or morally corrupting influences on New Orleans society. The hidden basement contained detailed lists of targets that included politicians, businessmen, clergy, and community leaders who had been marked for elimination as part of what the brothers saw as their sacred duty to protect the city from corruption. The brothers had apparently used their network of initiates to carry out these elimination campaigns, with members of the organization infiltrating various levels of city government, law enforcement, and business to identify targets and create opportunities for their removal. The documentation reveals that they had successfully eliminated dozens of individuals who they believed were threats to the spiritual welfare of New Orleans, using methods that ranged from apparent accidents to mysterious illnesses that could not be traced to any natural cause. The financial success of the brothers' operation was extraordinary, with their records showing that they had accumulated wealth equivalent to millions of dollars in today's money through a combination of membership dues, ritual fees, and what amounted to supernatural extortion of wealthy individuals who had been convinced that they needed the brothers' protection from spiritual threats. The organization invested their profits in real estate, legitimate businesses, and the construction of increasingly sophisticated ritual facilities that allowed them to conduct ever more complex and powerful ceremonies. The protection that allowed the brothers to operate with virtual impunity came from their infiltration of law enforcement and political organizations, but it was reinforced by the genuine fear that their reputation inspired throughout New Orleans. Even people who didn't believe in supernatural forces understood that crossing the brothers could result in mysterious accidents, sudden business failures, or family tragedies that seemed to strike with supernatural precision. The beginning of the end for the Hoodoo brothers came in the fall of 1909, when a young federal investigator named Thomas Morrison arrived in New Orleans with a mandate to investigate reports of organized criminal activity that appeared to be connected to fraternal organizations throughout the South. Morrison was a former Pinkerton detective who had been recruited by the newly created Bureau of Investigation and possessed both the investigative skills and the psychological resilience necessary to infiltrate and expose criminal organizations that operated under the cover of legitimate social institutions. Unlike previous attempts to investigate the brothers, Morrison's approach was systematic and patient rather than confrontational. He began by joining several mainstream fraternal organizations in New Orleans and gradually working his way into the confidence of members who might have knowledge of more extreme or secretive groups. His background as a detective had taught him to recognize the psychological patterns that characterized criminal organizations, and he quickly identified signs that suggested the existence of a secret society that was using fraternal cover to commit serious crimes. Morrison's investigation revealed that the brothers had created a sophisticated network of influence that extended throughout New Orleans' fraternal community, with initiates placed in key positions in dozens of legitimate organizations where they could identify potential recruits and gather intelligence about individuals who might pose threats to the brothers' operations. His analysis of membership records, financial transactions, and communication patterns eventually led him to identify the core leadership of the organization and to understand the scope of their criminal activities. The confrontation between Morrison and the Hoodoo brothers began in January 1910, when the investigator started gathering evidence of the organization's human sacrifice rituals and building a case that could be presented to federal prosecutors. The brothers responded by attempting to eliminate Morrison through what they believed were supernatural means, conducting elaborate curse rituals designed to cause his death or drive him insane before he could expose their activities, but Morrison proved to be resistant to the brothers' supernatural attacks, possibly due to his skeptical mindset and his focus on gathering concrete evidence rather than engaging with the organization on a spiritual level. His continued investigation eventually led him to discover the location of the brothers' ritual facility and to gather the evidence necessary to coordinate a federal raid on their operations. The final confrontation took place on March 13, 1910, when Morrison led a team of federal agents and local police officers in a coordinated raid on multiple locations associated with the Hoodoo brothers, including their hidden basement ritual chamber, several safe houses where victims were held before sacrifice, and the homes and businesses of the organization's leadership. What they found exceeded even Morrison's worst expectations: multiple victims in various stages of the ritual process, sophisticated equipment for conducting human sacrifices, and detailed records documenting years of systematic murder disguised as fraternal ritual. The immediate result was the arrest of dozens of brothers' members, though the four core leaders managed to escape during the confusion of the raids, apparently having been warned of the coming investigation by sympathizers within law enforcement. The captured members were charged with multiple counts of murder, conspiracy, and federal crimes related to interstate transportation of victims, but many of the trials were conducted in secret due to concerns that public knowledge of the organization's activities might damage the reputation of legitimate fraternal organizations throughout the country. The broader implications of the case extended far beyond New Orleans to influence federal legislation regarding fraternal organizations and the development of new investigative techniques for dealing with criminal groups that operated under the cover of legitimate social institutions. The brothers' sophisticated use of ritual psychology and group manipulation had created challenges for law enforcement that required new approaches to understanding and combating organized criminal behavior. The psychological analysis of the brothers themselves, based on their detailed documentation and witness testimony, reveals a group dynamic that allowed normal fraternal relationships to coexist with systematic murder and ritual cannibalism. The fact that dozens of otherwise respectable men could be convinced to participate in human sacrifice demonstrates the powerful psychological effects of ritual manipulation and the dangerous potential of fraternal organizations when their bonding mechanisms are corrupted by criminal leadership. The sociological implications of the case were equally significant, as it revealed how legitimate social institutions could be infiltrated and corrupted by criminal organizations that understood how to exploit the psychological needs that drove men to seek membership in fraternal groups. The brothers' success in recruiting members from mainstream organizations demonstrated the vulnerability of any group that used secrecy, ritual, and graduated initiation as bonding mechanisms. The case has also influenced contemporary discussions about the relationship between fraternal organizations and criminal activity, the ethics of secret societies, and the responsibility of legitimate organizations to monitor and prevent infiltration by criminal elements. The brothers' sophisticated understanding of group psychology and ritual manipulation continues to provide insights for researchers studying how criminal organizations recruit and maintain member loyalty. The preservation of the evidence from the brothers' ritual chamber has provided researchers with unprecedented insight into the psychology of men who are willing to commit murder in pursuit of spiritual power and fraternal belonging. The detailed documentation left behind by the organization offers a unique window into minds that saw human sacrifice as a legitimate form of religious practice, revealing psychological mechanisms that continue to operate in various forms throughout contemporary society. The impact on the victims' families and the broader fraternal community was devastating and long-lasting. Many of the families who lost members to the brothers' rituals never learned the truth about what had happened, as the official cover-up meant that their loved ones were simply listed as missing persons who had presumably left New Orleans in search of better opportunities elsewhere. The mystery of what happened to the four core leaders after their escape has never been solved. Despite decades of investigation by federal agencies and fraternal historians, some theories suggest that they fled to Mexico or South America, where they may have continued their ritual practices in areas with less law enforcement oversight. Others believe that they may have been killed by former associates who feared that their capture would expose the broader network of corruption that had protected their operations. The discovery of the hidden ritual chamber in 2022 has reignited interest in the case and raised new questions about whether other similar organizations may have existed in other American cities during the early 20th century. The sophisticated nature of the brothers' operation suggests that they may have learned their techniques from other groups or taught their methods to associates who continued the practices elsewhere. The case continues to influence contemporary discussions about fraternal organizations, secret societies, and the potential for legitimate social institutions to be corrupted by criminal elements. Legal scholars point to the Hoodoo brothers case as an early example of the challenges that arise when criminal organizations use legitimate social structures as cover for illegal activities, an issue that remains relevant in contemporary cases involving organized crime and terrorism. The psychological impact of the case extends beyond the immediate victims to include the investigators, prosecutors, and community members who were exposed to evidence of the brothers' practices. Thomas Morrison's later writings reveal that he struggled with what would today be recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder for the rest of his life, and several other people who were involved in the investigation reportedly suffered from an inability to participate in fraternal activities without being reminded of the horrors they had witnessed. As we reflect on the story of the Hoodoo brothers and their reign of fraternal terror in early 20th century New Orleans, we must grapple with uncomfortable questions about the nature of male bonding, the psychology of secret societies, and the vulnerability of legitimate organizations to infiltration by criminal elements. The case reminds us that the most dangerous criminals are often those who can exploit our deepest needs for belonging and meaning, using our desire for brotherhood and spiritual connection as weapons against us. The courage shown by Thomas Morrison in investigating and exposing the brothers, despite the obvious danger to his own life and the supernatural threats directed against him, serves as a powerful reminder that evil can only triumph when good people choose to remain silent or inactive. His willingness to risk everything to stop their crimes, even when the ritual elements of the case challenged his own understanding of human psychology, demonstrates the kind of moral courage that is necessary to confront the darkest aspects of organized criminal behavior. The legacy of the Hoodoo brothers continues to influence how we understand the intersection of legitimate social institutions and criminal activity, providing insights that remain relevant to contemporary investigations of organizations that use secrecy and ritual as tools for criminal enterprise. The systematic documentation that the brothers themselves provided of their techniques offers a unique window into minds that saw murder as a legitimate form of spiritual practice, revealing psychological mechanisms that continue to operate in various forms throughout contemporary society. Today, as we continue to grapple with questions about the role of secret societies, the ethics of fraternal organizations, and the potential for legitimate institutions to be corrupted by criminal elements, the story of the Hoodoo brothers provides both warning and guidance. It shows us that the most dangerous criminal organizations are often those that can exploit our deepest psychological needs while maintaining the appearance of legitimacy and respectability. The preservation of the evidence from the brothers' ritual chamber serves as a reminder that truth has a way of surviving even the most determined efforts to suppress it, and that the victims of even the most horrific crimes deserve to have their stories told and their suffering acknowledged. The fact that this evidence remained hidden for over 110 years before being discovered by accident suggests that there may be other similar cases waiting to be uncovered, other victims whose stories have been lost to history but whose evidence remains buried in the hidden corners of our communities. As you reflect on this story, I encourage you to consider how the dynamics that enabled the Hoodoo brothers' crimes continue to operate in our world today. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you're aware of similar cases or unexplained disappearances connected to fraternal organizations in your own community's history, please consider sharing that information as well. Only by bringing these hidden histories to light can we hope to prevent future tragedies and honor the memory of those who suffered in darkness for far too long. The story of the Hoodoo brothers reminds us that brotherhood without morality is merely organized cruelty, that the most dangerous predators are those who can exploit our need for belonging and meaning, and that the price of legitimate fraternal fellowship is eternal vigilance against those who would corrupt our noblest institutions for their own twisted purposes. Remembering their victims, we commit ourselves to ensuring that such horrors never again find fertile ground in the shadows of our social organizations.